When I first came to Bohol, I was chatting to the lady that is the wife of the Ambacon, and she was talking to me about America and when I would be going back to America. I said, well, I have no intention of going back to America. I've come here because I've come here permanently. So she said, oh, and she'd already found out my age. Filipinos and Filipinas especially are almost professional interrogators, so that they always have their questions which they are completely fearless in asking. So she said, when she knew that I was coming here and I had intended to be here permanently, she said, oh, so you've come here to die? Well, I was a mere child back then, only 74, and I said, well, actually no, I've come here to live. And of course back then it was true. It's still true, but the fact is that as we do get older, and it's different for some people, it comes at a different age for other people. For some it's a little bit like for me, came very late. I only started to have these questions of myself about when I might be moving on to better things, hopefully, which wouldn't be hard in the world, the way the world is at the moment. But you inevitably will start to think about what your real feelings are about moving on to greener pastures, a more heavenly situation, however you might choose, or just maybe just going to dust. But it did make me think more about that, and as time went by, of course, I did think about what my feelings were and what my plans were if I was going to move on to something else. That some people think that they're just going to go to dust to dust, but that's only a physical side of it. I really don't. If I hold my hand up and pinch the flesh, that's not me, is my feeling. So if you're actually feeling that way, you really need, in my estimation, you need to address some of the more fundamental things about what we do when we're here. There's a whole setup here that ensures the survival and the continuation of the human race. It's a much maligned thing at the moment because people are going past the basic gender of just two, a man and a woman, and they're inventing all kinds of other things. The beauty of a man and a woman and a man, is that in being together in the way that they're designed, they will actually perpetuate the human race. It's a method that works. And that act of perpetuating the human race is designed to be pleasurable so that we won't ignore our duties in that fashion. Of course, the later things of choosing that there's 100 different genders is a recent thing, relatively recent thing anyway, to the degree that it is now. So what I'm really getting to is that while we're here, we make a ton of decisions, like so many decisions, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. Now, for myself, I've made, I think, probably not being falsely modest, but I think I've done more than my fair share of bad decisions. I was very good at it. But as time goes by, you have to realize that making the decision doesn't stick you in time. It doesn't stick you back there at the moment of the bad decision. Now, I've been talking to Beth today, and she has had to make some tough decisions. Now, Beth is a person who doesn't make decisions easily. Whenever we go out, she has to change clothes, the ones that she finally decides to go out in are after four different changes, and this is quite set. This is what happens. She makes four decisions to make the final one. Now my thing is that what I've come to realize is that there's no need to make the same decision over and over. Now, what they talk about learning is learning from your mistakes. So obviously what that implies is it means that you make a decision which turns out to be a bad one, and don't do it again. Don't learn from that. So you learn from bad decisions as well as good decisions. I remember one particular motivational speaker, he said, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing wrong. Well, that's a play on words. And what he actually means is, of course, that you shouldn't be afraid of making a mistake, because anybody who's never made a mistake is someone who hasn't been trying very hard. That's obviously clear. Now, for instance, when I was learning to play the trombone, I made hundreds of mistakes every day, but I had to learn from them, and sometimes you can learn by being told, and other times it really takes you getting into a real mess that when you finally get yourself out of it, you say never again. And that is something that is probably one of the biggest lessons. But what you don't do is say, I'll never try that again. Because if you think, sometimes one of the things, I'm not a person that enjoys spectator sports like football or cricket or baseball or any one of those, but I do enjoy watching very skilled athletes who are gymnasts. I enjoy a good gymnast. I love watching how they can be so perfect all the time, but they're not perfect all the time. They make a ton of mistakes, and sometimes you will see someone working on the mat and they'll do the most incredible routine, which I saw one woman, a young woman, who did an incredible routine and actually did something like 3 somersaults to end the routine, and then she landed just slightly wrong. And that's something that you learn from. I don't think for a minute that she thought to herself, well, I'm never going to try that again. She didn't. She said, next time I will do such and such a thing wrong, and that will not happen again. When I came out of the army as a musician, and my first job when I came out was I went on a summer season in a comedy band called the Crackerjacks, complete unknown band, and still unknown. So they're actually persistent. So I did that for a summer season, and then when I came to London, I actually got a job in the Bertram Mills circus band, which was doing a 17-week season. I believe it was 17 weeks at the Olympia, and I was living in Earl's Court, so I just used to go, and it was only like a walk to go to Olympia. So I was very interested in the circus, and at that time actually considered joining the circus because I loved watching the clowns, and they were so funny in that Bertram Mills circus. The clowns were so incredibly funny, really, really very clever. Now, it's only later when horror as a genre has been developed to the nth degree, and clowns have now become somewhat sinister. If you think about the Joker, and his mouth goes up here, the origin of those scars, these are scars, and they do the makeup and they make it look as if they are actually scars. Where that, I don't know that that originates in Ireland, but in Ireland the IRA, who were brutal in their discipline and retribution of people who betrayed them. If someone betrayed the cause of the IRA, then what if he became what I suppose the Americans would call a snitch? If he came and he betrayed them by talking, then what they would do is they would cut him up here, just like the Joker in Batman was cut here. In the story of the Batman, of course, it was his father that did that. The IRA did that, and they did that for a specific purpose, because the scars would heal. The man would be taken to hospital and they would stitch him up. But back then, surgery such as that was pretty crude, and the scars would be very evident, and he would be known for being someone who told, and that was the punishment, to be recognized instantly by someone who was told. So the making the mistake, that's where the case of the man making that mistake of betraying his cause and his fellows, that will be one where he would not forget, and that was the purpose. But if we ordinary folk make a mistake, then we should not dwell on that mistake. We really need to realize we made a bad decision and we now need to move on. So you don't stick yourself in the past by going over it and over it. Now, I remember meeting someone a lady who was a very talented artist, and once we started to talk and share personal experiences, she told me about her ex-husband, and how she told me in great detail how her ex-husband used to berate her, belittle her, degrade her, and he would do this to me and he would do that, and he would say this and say that, and he made nothing of me. And after a while I said, I had to say, so he did a really good job on you, didn't he? She said, what do you mean? Well, he did such a good job on you that you've continued to do the job for him. He did a good job of making you feel less about yourself, and now you're repeating to me all of the things that he said to you in order to make you feel less of yourself. And so you've taken over from him, and you're now doing the same thing. And I said, you need to stop doing that. There are people out there, as you have discovered, there are people out there who will get in line to do this to you. You should not do it to yourself. And I remember how I turned on the television and I started to watch part of a program in which they the woman who was presenting it was what Americans call an African American, a black lady, and she was very, very clever. She was listening to a woman, and the woman, I had turned on the television, turned on the program just at the point of the woman had finished telling her story. And the presenter said to her, "That is the most awful, the most heartbreaking, the most terrible story that I've heard. You suffered greatly. And this is what I recommend that you do. Tell it to everybody. Tell everybody that story. Tell it and tell it and tell it. Tell it to the next person you meet. Tell it to a person you sit next to on the train. Tell it to a friend. Tell it to a relative. Tell it to everybody. And then, don't ever tell it again. Don't pay a bill twice. So if you go in, you get an enormous bill, don't agonize over it a week later and say, wow, you know, we were conned. We should never have paid that much. Think what we could have done with that money. That was awful. We should have known better. We shouldn't have paid him. We shouldn't have done this. You're paying the bill again. She was continuing the abuse that she had suffered. And the black lady had nailed it. She said, tell it and tell it and tell it. And then never tell it again. So if you've made a decision, as I've made many, and now I don't keep making them. I don't keep making that one mistake that I made, that I've forced myself to go over and try to forgive myself for. Sometimes the forgiveness is the smallest part of moving on. The moving on is getting out of that chair where you sit to abuse yourself and berate yourself as you did when you made that bad decision. No, don't sit in that place again. You need to move on. And bye for now.